Good morning and welcome to Children's Church. We have some different stories this week because, I was reading some Bible stories and I thought, I just can't wait to share those with you. See if you can figure out the common theme between these two stories. Now, the first story happens very early in Jesus' time when he was out talking to people and teaching and doing miracles. He had been down by the Sea of Galilee. Now, the Sea of Galilee is a very big, I guess you could call it like a lake, but it's so big you can't see to the other side of it. And the water gets very deep, and it's full of lots of different kinds of fish. Now, Jesus had been up along the Sea of Galilee, and a great crowd of people had gathered around because they all wanted to hear what he would have to say. But if he stood there on the shore, very few people would be able to hear what he was saying, and even less would be able to see him. So he got a quick idea. See, there was a couple of fishing boats right along the shore, and one of them was owned by a guy by the name of Peter. He's a fisherman there. Now, the Sea of Galilee is a little bit unique in how it's set up. If you get on a fishing boat and row just a little ways out from the shore and you talk, everybody on the shoreline can hear you. It's like a natural theater. So that's exactly what Jesus did. He asked Peter, can you just push off from the shore just a little bit so people can hear me talk? Now, you need to understand, Peter's a fisherman, and fishermen worked at night back then. What they would do is they would light a lamp or a torch on the front of their boat and hang it over in the dark. So the fish would see that light and go, "What's that?" And they'd swim closer to take a look. And while they were doing that, the fishermen would throw big nets way, way out past the fish. And the nets would splash in the water and kind of sink down. And then they'd start slowly pulling the nets in. And before the fish realized what had happened, the net had been all around them and they'd be captured. And that's how they would do their fishing every night. And they'd keep the kind of fish that they wanted. Well, that night, Peter got skunked. He hadn't caught a single fish. Nothing. And now he was mending his nets so he could go home and go to bed and do it all over again later. But just as he was mending his nets and about to call it a night and go get some sleep, I guess you'd say call it a day, here's Jesus asking, "Can you row me out in the water?" So Peter says, "Okay." So he goes out into the water a little bit and he listens as Jesus is talking to the crowds. And Jesus is saying amazing things and telling people about God and about God's love. And when he gets done talking, he says to Peter, "Let's go out into the deep water and do some fishing." It's daytime. It's warm out. You don't go fishing during the day. Now, Peter knew this, but he also knew that Jesus had been a carpenter, not a fisherman, obviously. So Peter tries to really gently say, you know a lot of things about God, you know a lot of things about neat stuff, but when it comes to fishing, I'm kind of the expert, and last night I haven't caught a thing. And Jesus just looks at him and Peter goes, "Yet if you ask, we'll do it." So to humor Jesus, he and Andrew cast their nets out into the water, and they start pulling them in, and he knows what he's going to get. He's going to get a lot of water. There's no fish are going to get captured by a net in broad daylight. And as he's pulling in the net, all of a sudden he gets a little tug back. Well, that's weird. Pulls in the net some more, and now he gets a big tug back. Oh my goodness, they have fish in the net. And they start pulling and pulling, and the closer they get to the boat, the more they realize they have got a lot of fish in the net. This is crazy. And so Peter and Andrew, his brothers, start hollering out for their friends, James and John, who are also fishermen, "Get out here, help!" And they came out and they start hauling in the net as best they can. And what they would do is they'd scoop the fish into the boat, the ones they wanted to keep, of course. And they start scooping and scooping and scooping and scooping. And the boat starts getting lower and lower and lower and lower in the water. And Peter and Andrew's boat's about to sink. And so they start scooping the fish into James and John's boat. And their boat starts getting lower and lower and lower in the water, and they're getting threatening to sink as well. And they finally get to shore. And Peter knows this isn't normal. This isn't right. And he just fell on his knees in front of Jesus and said, "You got to get away from me. I'm a wicked, sinful person." And Jesus just looks at Peter and says, "Peter, so far you've caught fish. Follow me. I'll teach you how to catch men." And that's the end of our first story. Now, our second story happened a while later. In the same way, though, Jesus and his closest friends had been out by the Sea of Galilee, and a great big crowd of people had gathered around. And Jesus had been teaching them all day long. And these crowds were not going to go anywhere because Jesus had been healing the sick and saying amazing things about God, and they just wanted to hear everything he would say. They wanted to be around him every moment they could. And Jesus was to the point where he was just tired. Have you ever been so tired you just need to take a nap? And that's what he needed. And Jesus said to his friends, let's just go to the other side of the lake. And so they pushed away from the shore in the boats, and they started going to the other side of the lake, and the waves are gently rocking the boat. And this is exactly what Jesus needed. And he went to the back of the boat where there's this nice big cushion, and he laid down and curled up and took a nap. And he's out cold, and the waves are gently rocking the boat, and everything's perfect, and the night is falling. But somewhere in the middle of the night, the waves picked up. And instead of gentle fluffing of the waves, it started to rock pretty hard. And the winds started to blow, and a big, violent storm blew up out of almost nowhere. And the waves started crashing over the side of the boat. And the wind is blowing, and the waves started making the boat almost want to flip over. And the disciples are doing everything, his followers are doing everything they can to try to keep this boat from sinking. And Jesus is in the back just snoozing away like nothing's going on. And finally they came and they woke him up and they said, don't you care? We're going to die. And Jesus looked at them, and he looks at the wind and the waves, and he just stands up and he says to the wind and the waves, stop, be still. And just like that, the wind stopped. The waves went still. Jesus turned and looked at his friends, who moments earlier had been terrified by the wind and the waves, now had a very different expression on their face, like, oh. And Jesus said to them, why were you afraid? Don't you trust me? Why don't you have any faith? And his closest friends just looked at each other in surprise and said, who is this guy? The wind and the waves obey him. And they went to the other side of the lake. And that's the end of our story. Okay. Now, because there were two stories, I want you to go back and listen to it one more time again, because I've got some questions I ask you, but I want to make sure you get all the details right. So listen one more time, and we'll go through our quiz questions. All right? Okay, here we go. I might throw in a new question for you this week, too. Listen carefully. Okay, question number 1. What pleased you? What did you like about this story? Question number 2 says, what displeased you? What did you not like about this story? Question number 3 asks, what does this story tell us about people? What people are like? Question number 4 says, what does this story tell us about God? The nature of God, what God is like. Question number 5, new question. What touched you the most about this story? What did you like the most? Question number 6, what should I do differently because of this story? Now remember, you need to answer this. I should something you'll do differently because of these stories. And the last question, question number 6, who should I tell this story to? Now remember, it has to be a person. And it can't be somebody who's just sitting there listening to the story with you. So I look forward to seeing your answers down in the comments field. And I look forward to seeing you next week for another time of Children's Church.